Before we begin today's video, I'd just like to announce that I'm going to be a guest at DOKI in Manchester, UK this August. I'll be hosting a live panel on the films of Hayao Miyazaki, as I go into a deep dive into the themes and ideas behind his films. So if you'd like to come meet me in person, then this is your chance. Now, onto the video. Howdy folks, Jamboriki here. Do you remember when you were a kid at school? A TV stand would be wheeled into the classroom and you'd get all excited about watching a movie instead of doing work? Well, one of my favourite times this happened was when the teacher put on George of the Jungle. I loved it so much, and remember laughing really hard at every joke. It's been more than 2 decades since that experience though, so I decided to rewatch the film as an adult and work out if it holds up today. Ursula Stanhope has come to the African jungle to meet his exotic animals. However, her egocentric fiancé Lyle has forced himself onto her trip, and he's hired 2 poachers to be his trackers. Lyle becomes impatient hanging around the jungle. He yanks Ursula into the deeper trees to find gorillas for her, so that they can go home sooner. Then, all of a sudden, a lion attacks the couple. Lyle runs away like a coward, leaving Ursula to fend for herself. Luckily, the legendary wild man George of the Jungle comes to her rescue, only to accidentally knock the poor woman out. Abe, George's talking gorilla friend, nurses Ursula and explains to George that Ursula is the same species as him. George and Ursula bond together in George's treehouse, where a romance starts to sizzle. Lyle, the poachers and Ursula's African guides eventually arrive at the treehouse. The poachers take aim at George's elephant Shep, so George charges towards the scumbags, only for Lyle to shoot the wild man in fear. Lyle is arrested for his crime, and Ursula takes a recovering George back to America. While in America, George experiences many new exciting things, or while Ursula has to tell her snobby mother that she no longer loves the wealthy Lyle and that she wants to call the wedding off. Ursula's mum dismisses her daughter's feelings, demands that the wedding is still on, and warns George to stay away from Ursula. Now, I'll be the first to admit that this film's storytelling isn't great. It's less of a natural flowing narrative and more of a series of wacky set pieces. Sure, there's conflicts and tensions happening, but I can't say that the film connects or paces them together organically. There's a very "and then this crazy random thing happens next" structure to the writing. Like, we open up with a jungle adventure about George and Ursula falling in love, all while a bumbling Lyle tries to find his fiancée, and the poachers plan to steal George's talking ape. We get an idea of the film we're in for, right? Then, once Lyle shoots George in a panic, all 3 of these plots scatter off in their own directions. Lyle ends up in jail for the rest of the movie, the poachers stay in the jungle to carry on their ape napping scheme, and George visits Western civilization while dealing with a new villain in the form of Ursula's snobby mum. Now, we're at least reminded that the poacher scenes are still relevant, because we frequently cut between George's American hijinks and the poachers carting a caged ape around the jungle. However, George never seems that homesick, or even worried about how the animals are doing without him, because he's far more invested in Ursula and her exciting strange world. So the connection between these plots is kind of thin. At the same time, we've not seen Lyle on screen since he was sent to jail. Sure, characters do mention him a lot, because the wedding is still happening, but despite being introduced as the villain, he's certainly no longer a prevalent character. All of these plots only tie together again when George's toucan informs him that Ape is being taken by the poachers, which sparks George to return home so that he can fight the poachers and save Abe. Ursula also joins in the action too after realizing that she's in love with George. Then, completely out of the blue, Lyle suddenly appears as the villain again, and we get an exposition dump about how Lyle has become a cult leader who can force Ursula to marry him. Do you see where I'm going with all this? A major character disappears halfway through, only to come back again at the last minute. All the plots only vaguely intertwine, and it's like we're watching 2 movies happening at once. But don't take this criticism too seriously though. I'm just making a casual observation about the overall flow of the film. Despite everything I've just pointed out, I don't really mind how random this film is, because it's a silly, self-aware comedy with its tongue planted firmly in its cheek. When I take off my objective critic glasses, I can really appreciate George of the Jungle as a wholesome and funny Tarzan spoof.
I know you're there, Ursula. Pick up the phone and tell me why you have been avoiding me. Pick up the phone!
Well, I think that was an overreaction.
The central appeal of this comedy film, without a shred of doubt, is the character of George himself. He's one of the definitive Hollywood himbos to me, a stunningly attractive and well-physiqued man, with a very dense understanding of everything. But behind his pretty face, impressive abs and slow wit, is a big-hearted and sensitive man who feels deeply for others.
I mean, he's not brainy in that doctor, lawyer, banker way, but he has something else. He has a
Sensual intelligence.
sensual intelligence.
Wow. Oh my god.
He looks like a traditional male lead, except that he's a lot more vulnerable than most action stars. He develops close intimate bonds with wild animals, happily dresses in feminine fashion without any shame, and has a selfless interest in helping people. George really is a perfect role model of positive masculinity for kids watching.
Creature. George, what on earth are you doing?
George just feel like looking a little special today, that all.
Brendan Fraser has an amazing acting range that not enough people appreciate, but he really did master the himbo role in the 90s. George is the best example of him perfecting the trope. He gives George this natural charm and charisma that steals our hearts, plus Fraser's comedic skills, both physical and speaking, are delivered with expert talent.
The Jungle King was pleased to find he looked pretty good in Armani.
Pretty darn good.
The other draw to this film is the adorable innocent romance between its two leads. George and Ursula have the cutest chemistry together. You can tell that Brendan Fraser and Leslie Mann hit it off on set, because you really buy how much they've fallen for each other. As a matter of fact, Fraser and Mann actually admitted years later that they had a secret crush on each other, which really comes off in the finished film.
What I came here to say was that I love you
Ursula loved George.
so much.
George loved Ursula too.
Ursula gives George a sweet human connection after spending his whole life in the jungle, plus helps George to return to his roots by bringing him home to America, while Ursula, who has let others overpower her decisions all her life because she's such a soft-hearted person, becomes a more adventurous and self-confident woman, all thanks to George's goofy free spirit.
Big, brave, queen of jungle. Come on, Ursula.
Wow.
Not bad for beginner.
By the end of the film, George and Ursula get married, then live in the jungle together, which I find very poignant, because it shows how Ursula has found a sense of freedom outside a judgmental civilization. So what's the film's comedy like? Well, I really like that the humour is versatile enough to appeal to the whole family. I remember laughing at this movie as a kid for its silliness, and as an adult, I found myself laughing at the things I never noticed or understood. It's good how the film's immature side comes off as sincerely playful. There's no cynicism or desperation in the physical slapstick or giggly toilet humour, because I get the impression that the filmmakers found it all just as funny as kids will.
There's an elephant around here.
Bad guy falls and poop. Classic element of physical comedy. Now comes the part where we throw our heads back and laugh. Ready? Ready!
There's a cartoony style of filmmaking to the comedy direction too. While I do think that there are better examples of live-action films that emulate animation, I still think that George of the Jungle does a good job at recreating cartoon energy in front of a camera. A lot of what works is down to snappy editing and speed effects, but the actors also deserve credit too. They really get into the fun spirit of a comedy comic strip being brought to life. They know the film they're in. But at the same time, the film's juvenile side is balanced out by its self-awareness. For every character falling over or making a fart joke, another character makes a dry-witted observation about the stupidity around them. When we're in the jungle, Ape is there to bring a little British sarcasm and academic class to George's treehouse antics.
Want George of Jungle to tell you special vine swinging secrets?
Fine, tell me all your secrets.
George's Secrets. There's the shortest book ever written.
Then, when we're in America, Ursula's best friend Betsy is around to give deadpan commentary.
Tomorrow is your engagement party, and unless they give day passes out of Bujumbura jail, Lyle is not likely to attend. So, tell him the truth and don't worry about it.
And a cheeky comic relief who slides in the film's more adult jokes.
Hi, George of Jungle.
Charmed, I'm sure.
George.
One thing I also noticed when rewatching this film as an adult is how a lot of the humor is at the expense of rich white people. In jungle scenes, Lyle becomes the laughingstock in the eyes of the African guides, who consistently tease this rich white man's cultural ignorance and entitlement. Like, there's a scene where Lyle tries to bond with the African guides by giving them cigars and a photo camera, while he condescendingly explains what they are to them. under the bigoted assumption that these men have never seen such artifacts before, but the punchline is on Lyle.
He says that he likes your magic pictures, but he prefers the resolution of the Leica 35mm transparency. He also says that your lens is dirty, but he has the equipment to clean it for you.
Then when we're in America, Ursula's uptight mother serves as an archetype for the wealthy, controlling parent who looks down on anyone below the upper class.
I don't want to marry Lyle anymore.
We understand, dear.
Just kidding.
It's kind of wild seeing a 90s children's film using satirical comedy to lampoon the Western elite's classism, racism, and colonial greed. In a way, this film was kind of ahead of its time. One last thing I love about the movie's comedy is the movie's iconic narrator. The narrator for this film is so entertaining that I can't imagine the film without him.
And so, onward and upward the tired trekkers trudged on feverish footsies over perilous paths. When they finally beheld the mighty Ape Mountain, they reacted with awe. Oh. I said awe. A-W-E. That's better.
Australian voice actor Keith Scott reads the narrator with this charming, old-fashioned boldness, while also sounding genuinely invested in the story he's telling to the audience. Heck, the narrator is a character in his own right, because not only does he sometimes take command of the storytelling now and again for comedic effect.
Later they rested, while the tired tusker teased on a... Wait a second, the dog bone is too much. Lose it. That's better.
But he also ends up directly interacting with the on-screen characters too, which brilliantly fits the movie's self-aware tone.
Oh, no.
Oh, no was right for the exhausted ape nappers.
Why don't you say something constructive for a change? Like what we should do now?
There's quite a lot of CGI effects in this movie, and I'm afraid that not much of it holds up today. 90s computer animation still had a long way to go, so we end up with a lot of primitive-looking 3D animals. But what about the puppetry? Well, you can tell when a puppet is doubling for an animal, but I found the puppetry more believable and tangible than the CGI, because it's really there, and doesn't have that uncanny valley weirdness you get from retro computer effects. The most prominent puppet character is Ape. I really like how Disney found a balance of realistic and cartoony for Ape's design. He has all the attributes of a real gorilla, but is also quite humanized as well. It's what helps us to look over how obvious it is that Ape is just a guy in a hairy suit. Ape's animatronic effects aren't perfect, you can see the robotics clicking underneath, but the mouth movements sync well with John Cleese's sophisticated delivery, plus Nicholas Caddy's physical gestures fit with Ape's facial expressions quite decently.
Shep, come here at once. Come on. How many times do I have to tell you my violin bow is not a chew toy?
To conclude, George of the Jungle has rough storytelling and maybe some jokes that will be too juvenile for more mature grown-ups, but I personally really enjoyed rewatching it as an adult. It's a very charming film that knows how dumb and silly it is, but it also surprised me with its brazen satire on Western culture. I ended up falling in love with this movie all over again, all while appreciating the movie's wonderful celebration of positive masculinity and healthy pure love. I really do think it deserves way more credit for what it is. So what do you think of George of the Jungle? Let everyone know in the comment section below, plus don't forget to like, subscribe and click the notification bell.
Today, we celebrate our Independence Day.